Gate B-22 at Denver Airport crackled with an unusual silence, not because it was empty, but because every eye was drawn to a single vacant seat in the first-class cabin. Seat 2A, the power seat, the seat for those who paid more than a month's salary just for 2 hours of comfort. Yet 2A remained empty, and that emptiness felt like a small tear waiting to be ripped wide open. Catherine Moore, 40th and 6, veteran chief flight attendant of Orion Airlines, stood at the boarding door. Her face was sharp, her eyes trained to catch the slightest irregularity. 23 years on the job had drilled into her a habit. Anything out of place could be a threat. Catherine trusted her instincts, and today her instincts whispered, "Something is coming." The boarding announcement echoed, and the stream of passengers flowed in, a cacophony of rolling suitcases, children crying, adults arguing. Catherine scanned the crowd. A young father juggling a toddler, a couple bickering over seat numbers, a group of businessmen typing furiously on laptops. Ordinary enough, until a figure appeared at the end of the jet bridge. He did not hurry. Each step was measured, steady, as if the world itself had to slow down to his pace. Anthony Graves, 40, 4. A charcoal grey tailored suit, a deep blue silk tie, Oxford shoes, polished to a mirror shine, catching the dim hallway light. At his side, only a slim leather briefcase, far too light for someone seated in 2A. Catherine narrowed her eyes. Alone. No checked luggage, no phone in hand, no frantic pace of the genuinely busy. Too neat, too seamless to trust. Her instincts flared. "Good afternoon, sir. Boarding pass, please." Catherine's tone was polite, but cold. Anthony paused a breath, then handed over the ticket. Seat 2A. First class, everything in order. But Catherine pressed on. "And your ID?" she added, her voice raised half a pitch. Anthony arched a brow. "Is there a problem?" His voice was calm, low, even. The voice of a man accustomed to power. "Just a random check. Security protocol," Catherine replied quickly, as if needing the excuse herself. Anthony drew his ID from his breast pocket and handed it over. Catherine studied it under the light, turning it carefully. Nothing irregular. Everything too flawless. Then why does it still feel wrong? She thought. Yet her instincts nagged. This was no ordinary passenger. "Seat 2A. You may board." Catherine returned the documents with a smile, but her eyes stayed fixed on his back as he passed. Anthony gave a slight nod, a curt, "Thank you." The way he spoke, short, precise, conveyed absolute control. She watched him, her gaze sharp as a blade. No phone, no chatter, no rush. Just silence. Dangerous silence. She told herself it had nothing to do with the color of his skin, but deep inside, the presence of a black man in a luxury suit, claiming 2A, stirred a chain of unconscious suspicion. When Anthony placed his briefcase in the overhead and sat down, another first-class passenger, a middle-aged woman, glanced his way, lips pressed tight, as if silently asking, "Who is he?" Catherine felt the shift in the air, like static electricity hovering overhead. She turned to her young colleague, Lauren, just 24, and whispered, See the man in 2A? Something's off. Lauren frowned. He looks fine to me. Why? Catherine gave a dry smile. The suit doesn't match the man. Trust me. Watch him. Lauren bit her lip and nodded slightly, though unease rippled inside her. In the cabin, Anthony sat still, his eyes on the window. Around him, passengers tapped at phones, typed on laptops, ordered drinks. Only he remained motionless, like a statue. Yet within, his heart beat slow and steady, like a drum announcing something imminent. He knew. He knew the eyes watching him. He knew the prejudice seeping into the air. And he let it unfold, as though he were waiting for it. Outside, the midday sun blazed across the runway. Inside, tension seeped through the cabin like oil to a flame. No one knew that this flight would carry more than passengers from Denver to Phoenix. It would drag an entire airline into the storm. Catherine adjusted her collar and sighed. If something is wrong, she thought, I will be the first to find it. But she did not know. The man she doubted, the one deemed out of place, was the most powerful person on that plane. And when the truth came to light, every glance, every question, every choice she made would become evidence. The clock ticked closer to 1:40 p.m. First class was nearly full, the cabin door closed, and the only sounds were the thud of suitcases being placed in the overhead and the sharp click of seatbelts locking into place. No one noticed that Catherine Moore's heartbeat was racing faster than usual. To her, seat 2A remained an unanswered question. Catherine leaned toward her young colleague, Lauren Price, lowering her voice but keeping it firm. Did you notice? He didn't make eye contact. No phone. No luggage. It doesn't add up. Lauren hesitated, her eyes drifting toward the front of the cabin, where Anthony Graves sat upright, his hands folded neatly on his lap, his face cut sharp in the sunlight streaming through the window. Maybe he's just private? Lauren whispered, trying to stay neutral. Or maybe, Catherine replied, her eyes still locked on 2A. He doesn't belong there. The chill in her words made Lauren shiver. She had only been on the job for less than a year, not yet hardened by Catherine's edge, but she could feel the atmosphere around them growing heavier. The plane prepared to push back from the gate. The intercom crackled. Flight attendants, prepare for final cabin check. Lauren jumped up, but Catherine caught her hand. Wait, I'll handle 2A. Her heels struck firm against the carpet as she approached. Anthony looked up, his dark eyes meeting Catherine's sharp stare. In that instant, the cabin seemed to fall silent. Mr. Graves, Catherine leaned closer than necessary. I'm sorry, but I'll need to see your boarding pass again. Passengers nearby lifted their heads. A boy in row 3 stopped fiddling with his phone, eyes wide with anticipation. A middle-aged woman across the aisle lowered her own phone onto the table, camera already recording. Anthony moved slowly, deliberately, pulling the ticket from his inner pocket and handing it over, almost as a challenge. You already checked it, his voice calm, deep, and steady. It's just a double check. I hope you understand, Catherine answered, struggling to keep her professional mask while her pulse thundered. Anthony leaned back slightly, his gaze unblinking. Are you accusing me of something? The question, short and sharp as a blade, froze Catherine. She knew passengers were listening, knew their eyes were tightening around her like a noose. Still, she pressed forward, raising her voice loud enough for all to hear. "We've had incidents with fraudulent upgrades recently. Protocol requires confirmation." The mood shifted instantly. Whispers rippled through the cabin. A man in seat 2C leaned forward, his face twisted in frustration. "Excuse me, he's been sitting there since boarding. What's the issue?" Catherine snapped back, her voice curt. "This is a private matter, sir. Please remain seated." The cabin went breathless. Lauren stood frozen at the back, her heart hammering. She's gone too far. Anthony's lips pressed into a thin line as he nodded. "I paid for this seat. Do you have a reason to think otherwise?" Catherine swallowed hard, lowering her voice but not her resolve. "I'm going to have the captain come speak with you." Anthony turned his eyes toward the window, watching sunlight flash across the wing, then back to Catherine. His voice was even and unyielding. "Do what you need to do." Moments later, hurried footsteps approached. Captain Daniel O'Connor, 50. His face weathered by decades of flight, entered the cabin with Catherine at his side. Whispers spread, and phones rose quietly into the air, lenses fixed on the scene. Daniel bent toward Catherine, listening as she rushed through words like suspicious passenger and non-compliance. He nodded once, his face calm. But when his eyes fell on Anthony, a middle-aged black man, seated upright, hands folded neatly on his lap, gaze unflinching. Daniel felt an invisible weight press down on him. "Sir," Daniel said, his voice low but commanding, "I understand there's some confusion about your seat assignment." "No confusion," Anthony answered immediately, his gaze steady. "Your attendant asked for my documents twice. I complied. Since boarding, I've been treated like a suspect." His voice was not raised, yet it carried through the cabin. Several passengers held their breath. A young woman whispered, "Oh my God, they're kicking him off." Daniel swallowed hard. "I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding, but for security reasons, I'll need you to step off the plane so we can clarify." The cabin jolted with shock. Breaths quickened, cameras clicked furiously. Anthony remained still, then spoke slowly, each word heavy as iron. "I'm not leaving my seat, unless you're prepared to explain to everyone here why a paying customer in first class is being removed without cause." In that moment, an unseen bolt of lightning split the air. Catherine froze. Sweat pricked at the back of Daniel's neck. Lauren swallowed hard. And the entire cabin, every pair of eyes, every phone camera, turned to seat 2A. No one knew. In just a few minutes, the truth would come to light. And seat 2A, seemingly just a chair, would become the epicenter of a storm that would shake the entire airline. The cabin air was thick, heavy with raised phones and unblinking eyes. At the center were only 3 figures. Anthony Graves, sitting tall and still. Catherine Moore, frozen in place, her hands gripping the seat back. And Captain Daniel O'Connor, towering, his voice steady though his heart raced. Daniel cleared his throat. "Sir, this is your final warning. If you refuse to comply, I'll have no choice but to call security." His words struck like a gavel. A young woman whispered, "They're really doing this." A boy in row 3 trembled with excitement, his eyes wet as if watching a movie scene unfold. Anthony inhaled slowly. Then, unhurried, he leaned down and reached for the slim leather briefcase at his feet. The cabin erupted with a scream. "He's reaching for something!" A few passengers ducked in panic. Catherine stepped back, eyes wide. Daniel raised a hand. "Sir," slowly. But from the case, Anthony drew only a small, polished leather wallet. He opened it, slid out a silver embossed card, and placed it in the captain's hand. Daniel read it. His eyes flickered once, then again. His chest tightened as though gripped by an unseen hand. The words glinted under the cabin light. Anthony D. Graves, Chairman of the Board, Orion Airlines. Silence fell across the cabin, thick enough to swallow every sound. Catherine's lips parted, but no words came. Her mind went blank. Words like protocol and fraudulent upgrade collapsed into hollow nothingness. Daniel swallowed hard. Sweat trickled at his temple. Before him was no suspicious passenger. This was the most powerful man in the company. He hadn't just bought a ticket. He owned the seats, the plane, even the uniforms they wore. Anthony rose slowly, each movement in rhythm with the cabin's collective heartbeat. His voice was clear, steady, carrying across the silence without needing to rise. "I was here to observe, not to act. But I've seen enough." A ripple of voices surged through the cabin, spreading like wind over water. Passengers lifted their phones, recording him directly. A teenage boy blurted out, "Oh shit." Anthony's gaze swept across every face, witnesses to what had unfolded. His voice grew firmer. "What you all witnessed today is exactly why I'm here. In the past year alone, I've received 47 complaints of racial bias across our airline. 47. Many dismissed. Many buried. This flight was chosen deliberately as a test." Catherine whispered faintly, I didn't know." Anthony turned sharply, his eyes locking on her. "No, you didn't. And that's the problem." Daniel opened his mouth, ready to justify, but closed it again. All he could hear were the 3 words engraved on the silver card: Chairman of the Board. At the back, Lauren stood frozen, tears filling her eyes. She had never witnessed a moment strip the truth so bare. At the cabin door, a security officer stepped in, then halted as he saw the scene. No one would call them now. The truth had already escaped control. Anthony lowered himself back into seat 2A with calm precision. He took out a slim leather notebook, opened it, and began to write. Each stroke of his pen felt like recording a verdict against an entire system. On social media, live videos from the cabin surged past 100,000 views. Hashtags, hashtag flight 3472, hashtag flying, while black, hashtag Orion scandal shot to the top of the trending lists. Comments poured in. "Unbelievable. This is history. Justice in real time." Catherine stumbled back a step, her thoughts unraveling in chaos. She told herself she had only followed procedure, only wanted safety. But each excuse shattered in her head, echoing with the prejudice she could no longer deny. Anthony lifted his head, his voice low yet resounding. "This isn't about me. It's about what people like me face every day. And today, it was captured on camera, for the world to see." A shudder swept through the cabin. Passengers exchanged glances, realizing they were sitting inside a storm that would shake an entire airline. Daniel drew a long breath, then stepped back. He knew deep down this moment would haunt him forever. Catherine stood trembling, her hands shaking. For the first time in 23 years of flying, she was no longer in control of the situation. She had become the evidence, and seat 2A, once questioned as out of place, had become the center of a truth that could no longer be hidden. The murmurs spread through the cabin like fire racing across dry grass. Phones were no longer hidden, but held high, cameras fixed directly on Catherine's face, capturing every flicker of panic in her eyes. A few passengers whispered, "This is going viral right now." In row 3, a teenager clutched his phone, his hands shaking with excitement. "Guys, I'm live. The chairman of Orion is on this flight. They tried to kick him out of his own seat." The viewer count on his screen shot from a few hundred to several thousand in under a minute. Anthony Graves sat still, back straight, hands resting on a slim leather notebook. He wrote in short, precise strokes, like a surgeon cutting into a wound, without emotion, without hesitation. The passengers around him could not sit still. A middle-aged woman whispered, "He's the chairman? Oh my God." I almost believed she was right to question him. Catherine stood pressed against the galley, her chest tightening. "I just shot myself in the foot. No worse, I just blew up my entire career." Her eyes searched for Daniel, hoping the captain would step in and take the heat. But Daniel had already retreated into the cockpit, leaving Catherine to face the storm alone. Lauren, her eyes red, whispered softly, "Jess, what do we do?" Catherine's voice rasped, hoarse. "Stick to protocol. First drink pass. No talking unless necessary." But even she knew every protocol was now meaningless. Outside the cabin, 2 airport security officers stepped into the jet bridge, confused. No one had called them. They stopped, exchanged a glance, then backed away, realizing they had stumbled into something far bigger than their authority. Anthony slowly pulled out his phone from the briefcase, unlocking it with his fingerprint. One message appeared, a single word: "Begin." He hit send. Instantly, 1,000 miles away in Dallas, on the 19th floor of Orion Airlines headquarters, rows of screens lit up. Red letters flashed. "Crisis protocol initiated. Flight 3472. In the operations room, Communications Director Kendra Liu, 39, gasped as live stream numbers surged past 80,000. Less than 3 minutes later, the count crossed 100,000. Hashtags: Flight 3472, Orion Scandal, flying, while black climbed straight to the top of Twitter trends. An aide shouted, "CNN just picked it up." Kendra spun around, voice sharp. "Get the CEO liaison on the line. Draft a holding statement. And find out who the crew is. We need names yesterday." Back in the cabin, Catherine felt eyes piercing her back. Passengers whispered, some pointing cameras directly at her, their comments soft but searing. She kept asking him like he didn't belong. Unbelievable in 2025. Lauren tried to hide her tears. "I didn't want to be part of this, but I stayed silent. And silence is complicity." Anthony, after sending the message, said nothing more. He closed the phone, set it on the table, and wrote a few more lines in his notebook. That posture, calm, steady, unnerved Catherine. More than an outburst ever could. It wasn't rage. It was silence carrying the weight of a tidal wave. A man in seat 2C, who had defended Anthony from the start, shook his head and spoke loud enough for all to hear. "They messed with the wrong man today." His words landed like a verdict on Catherine. The cabin door had not yet closed. The first officer's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We're cleared for pushback." His tone was neutral, deliberately flat. But no one in the cabin believed this was a normal flight anymore. As the plane began to roll, Catherine clutched the edge of the metal galley cabinet. Her body trembled, not from the wheels bumping against the tarmac, but from the icy realization. 23 years of service. Her reputation as the iron attendant. All of it was melting away in the eyes of the passengers and the millions watching outside. Anthony looked up, his gaze falling on a young woman in row 6 live streaming to tens of thousands of viewers. He smiled faintly, not avoiding the lens. He had chosen this. He had turned the cabin into a courtroom, with truth as the only witness needed. Outside, the sky was clear and blue. But inside the cabin, the storm had already begun. The seatbelt sign switched off. A small ding, seemingly ordinary, rang out like the opening drumbeat of a new act. In the galley, Catherine Moore drew a deep breath, her hands trembling as she placed a pitcher of water on the service cart. She had done this motion thousands of times in 23 years, but never had it felt so heavy. Her palms were slick with sweat, her heart racing, her throat dry. "Jess." Lauren Price's voice was barely a whisper, hesitant. "Maybe I can take first class today." "No," Catherine cut in, sharp but strained. "This is my job." The cart rolled gently down the aisle. Every eye followed, every phone lifted again. Catherine could hear her own heartbeat louder than the wheels against the carpet. She reached seat 2A. Anthony Graves sat there, upright, the leather notebook open before him. He looked up slowly, his eyes calm and steady. Catherine bent slightly, her voice rough. "Would you like something to drink, Mr. Graves?" A long pause. Long. Everyone around them held their breath. Then Anthony answered, his voice deep and clear. "Just water. Thank you." She poured, her hand shaking so badly the water nearly spilled over the rim. Catherine placed the glass on his tray. She bit her lip, forcing herself to say the familiar line. "Anything else I can assist you with?" Anthony lifted his gaze, silent. 1 second. 2. Then he closed his notebook, tapping a finger gently against the leather cover. "Yes," he said. "You can answer a question." The air froze. Catherine stiffened, sweat breaking across her brow. What question?" Her voice quivered. Anthony leaned slightly forward, his tone low but unwavering. "When you looked at me at the gate, what exactly did you see that made you think I didn't belong here?" The cabin fell into absolute silence. Only the distant hum of the engines remained. Catherine opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her tongue felt like sandpaper. In her mind crowded all the safe answers. Protocol, random check, standard security. But his eyes cut through every excuse. I... she stammered, her breath unsteady. Anthony waited, patient yet unrelenting. Catherine swallowed hard. Then the confession burst out, raw and ugly. "I thought you looked out of place." In that instant, Lauren covered her mouth. A passenger drew a sharp breath. Phones shook in the hands of those live streaming. Anthony nodded slowly, lifting the glass of water. "Out of place," he repeated, emphasizing each word. "You've worked for Orion how long?" 23 years, Catherine answered, her voice faint. "And in those 23 years, how many black passengers have you personally seen escorted out of a seat they paid for?" Catherine froze. She searched her memory, but images surfaced. Confused faces, arguments silenced, men and women quietly leaving their seats. She had never counted. She had never thought to count. I don't know. I haven't counted." Anthony set the glass down, his gaze steady. "Maybe you should start." The words landed like a verdict, no gavel, no courtroom required. They were not only for Catherine, but for the entire cabin, and for the hundreds of thousands watching through their screens. Catherine turned away, her cheeks burning, her hands gripping the cart handle. Every eye followed her back as she pushed the cart forward, slowly, like someone carrying guilt. Behind her, Lauren wiped away tears. If I were in her place, would I have done any different? Or would I have stayed silent, just the same? Anthony reopened his notebook. He wrote a short, sharp line in italic script. "Bias confirmed." In the cockpit, Daniel O'Connor spoke tensely on a secure line to headquarters in Dallas. "You don't understand. He presented himself as a regular passenger. No clearance, no heads up. How was I supposed to know?" On the other end, a woman's voice was cold, decisive. "Captain, the point was for you not to know." Daniel froze, his hand gripping the controls tight. A mix of betrayal and exposure coursed through him. He realized he too was part of the experiment Anthony had designed. In the cabin, eyes still locked on seat 2A. The man did not shout, did not rage. He simply sat, asked one question, and let others bury themselves in the weight of their own prejudice. Outside the window, the sky stretched clear and blue. But in the hearts of everyone on Flight 3472, storm clouds had already gathered. In the cockpit, the glow of the control panel lit the tense face of Captain Daniel O'Connor. He pressed his headset tight, his voice low but trembling. "You don't understand. He boarded like a regular passenger, no clearance, no heads up. How was I supposed to know?" On the other end, a woman's voice was cold, sharp, leaving no space for escape. "Captain, the point was for you not to know." Daniel froze. He leaned back in his seat, sweat beading on his temple. In 30 years of flying, he had always believed he controlled every situation, but this time, he was just a piece on a chessboard that had been set long before. In the cabin, Anthony Graves sat tall in seat 2A, still writing in his leather notebook. He did not need to speak much, did not need to give orders. With just a glance, with one question, he had turned the cabin into living proof of what he came to expose. Around him, passengers whispered. An older man nodded slightly. "He's exposing them, and we're all witnesses." "We're..." the teenager in row 3 shouted softly when his live stream crossed 50,000 viewers. Comments flooded his screen. "This is history. Finally, accountability in real time. Fire the whole crew." Catherine Moore stood frozen in the galley, her chest heavy with regret. She repeated to herself, "I was only doing my job. I was only following protocol." But the more she said it, the more hollow it sounded. The image of that embossed silver card haunted her. Chairman of the board. Lauren stepped closer, her eyes red. "Jess, if this was a test, then we failed, didn't we?" Catherine turned away, unable to meet her gaze. She knew Lauren was right, but hearing it out loud made her heart tighten. The plane jolted lightly through turbulence. The seatbelt sign dinged on, pulling everyone back to the moment. But no one was thinking of flight safety anymore. The cabin was now a silent courtroom, where Anthony was the witness, Catherine and Daniel were the accused, and the passengers were the jury. In Dallas, on the 19th floor of Orion Airlines headquarters, Communications Director Kendra Liu swiveled toward a wall of screens. One showed a live stream already past 120,000 viewers. Hashtag Flight 3472, climbing to number 1 nationwide. "Get me the boardroom online. Now," Kendra ordered. An aide replied, his voice shaking. "Ma'am, Mr. Graves just texted a single word. Begin." Kendra closed her eyes, inhaling deeply. She knew what it meant. When Anthony used that word, there was no turning back. This was no longer an incident. This was a campaign. In the cabin, Anthony set his pen down, closed his notebook, and turned to the man in seat 2C, the one who had defended him from the beginning. He handed him a small folded note. "Would you mind passing this to the lady in 6B? The man nodded. The woman in 6B unfolded the paper, reading slowly. "I appreciate your call. We're not done yet. Stay ready." She clenched the note, her eyes gleaming as if she had just received a secret command. Catherine saw it, her chest tightening. She realized Anthony was not just sitting silently. He was orchestrating everything, every step, every glance, every word. And the whole world was watching. In the cockpit, Daniel gripped the controls tight. The woman's voice still echoed in his headset. "We've had a 40% increase in profiling complaints in 2 years. Most dismissed. Patterns don't lie. We needed to see how deep it runs." He flipped the switch, cutting the line, pulled off his headset, and buried his face in his hands. He had just been tested, and he had just exposed the truth. In the cabin, Anthony took a sip of water, his gaze sweeping across the passengers. He did not need to shout, did not need to slam his hand down. Through calm composure alone, he had stripped bare an entire system. In that moment, everyone understood. This was no longer a Denver to Phoenix flight. This was a flight headed straight into the heart of a corporate crisis. Phone screens glowed across the cabin. Hands trembled with both outrage and excitement. Everyone wanted to be the first to stream a moment that would enter history. The teenager in row 3 shouted, 150,000! We're at 150K. The number of live viewers jumped by the second, accompanied by a flood of comments. "This airline is finished. I can't believe this is happening in 2025. Fire her now!" In seat 2C, an older man leaned toward his wife and whispered, "We're sitting in the middle of a scandal worth billions." She nodded slightly, her eyes still fixed on Anthony, the black man sitting quietly, the calm center of the storm. Catherine Moore could hardly breathe. The stairs around her felt like knives pressing into her back. She tried to justify it in her mind. I was following regulations. I was protecting flight safety. But the more she repeated it, the louder the imagined laughter from social media became. Lauren whispered, her eyes red. "Jess, it's all over TikTok. My friend just texted. We're trending worldwide." Catherine shook her head, clutching the service tray to her chest. She knew Lauren was right. She felt as if every dark corner of her heart was being laid bare to millions of strangers. In seat 6B, the woman who had received Anthony's note opened her live stream and read the words aloud. "We're not done yet. Stay ready." The passengers listened in silence. No one laughed. No one doubted. They knew they were part of something larger now, an event that the press would dissect second by second. The plane shuddered lightly as it climbed, but no one paid attention. All eyes were fixed on seat 2A. Anthony closed his leather notebook and set it on his lap. He gave the woman a slight nod, a confirmation. Then he scanned the cabin slowly, meeting each passenger's gaze in turn. He said nothing, but the message was clear. You are witnesses, and silence is also a choice. In the cockpit, Captain Daniel O'Connor sat motionless. He knew this moment was beyond his authority. His decades of experience meant nothing here. He had just heard the chilling number relayed over the line. 2 million views across platforms in under 20 minutes. In Dallas, on the 19th floor of Orion Airlines headquarters, the crisis room was packed. Communications Director Kendra Liu pointed at the screens. "Every minute we stay silent, we lose another $1 million in reputation damage. Draft a holding statement now." A legal advisor objected. "If we admit too soon, we convict ourselves." Kendra slammed her hand on the table. "And if we delay, the internet convicts us anyway. Choose your poison." Beside her, a data engineer whispered, "Hat Orion scandal just hit #1 worldwide. Even non-English markets are picking it up." Kendra inhaled deeply. She knew this was no ordinary PR crisis. This was a revolution, broadcast live from the first-class cabin of their own airline. Back in the cabin, Catherine's throat was dry. She looked at Anthony, then at Lauren. Her lips trembled, wanting to form an apology, but the words stuck. Anything she said now would sound like an excuse. A passenger in the back raised his voice. "Mr. Graves, we support you." The words echoed through the cabin, followed by scattered applause. Lauren covered her mouth, eyes wet. Catherine retreated into the galley, her chest aching. 23 years, and she had become the face of the very worst. Anthony did not smile. He only nodded once, then unlocked his phone and typed a few short lines. No one saw the message, but when he pressed send, rows of LED lights in Dallas lit up. The hotline to the board of directors was triggered. As the plane leveled off, the intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, we thank you for your patience. We'll begin our service shortly." The monotone voice, flat and detached, sounded like a desperate attempt to hide what was already undeniable. This flight had been out of control for a long time. In seat 2A, Anthony folded his arms, his gaze steady and calm. He did not need to speak further. The world outside was already speaking for him. The service cart rolled quietly down the first-class aisle. The wheels hissed against the carpet, like they were dragging the weight of tension itself. Catherine Moore pushed it forward, her palms soaked with sweat. Passengers' eyes followed her every step. They no longer saw her as a seasoned chief attendant, but as someone standing before a tribunal, judged by millions watching through their screens. Lauren walked behind her, eyes red, whispering softly, "Jess, you don't have to do this." Catherine gripped the handle tight, answering with a shaky breath, "It's my job." She reached seat 2A. Anthony Graves sat there, back straight, the leather notebook closed neatly on his lap. Sunlight streamed through the window, casting his face in a calm but cutting glow. He looked up, his gaze sharp as a polished blade piercing straight through Catherine. "Would you like something to drink, Mr. Graves?" Catherine asked, her voice catching in her throat. Anthony did not answer immediately. He let the silence stretch until everyone in the cabin held their breath. Then his voice came, low and steady. "Water." Catherine poured, her hand trembling so badly that droplets splashed onto the tray. She quickly dabbed them with a napkin and set the glass down. "Anything else I can assist you with?" she forced out, her voice thin and quivering. Anthony rested his hand on the glass but did not lift it. His voice came, heavy, each word deliberate. "Yes. You can answer a question." The cabin froze. Phones leaned closer, microphones at full volume. Catherine's throat tightened. Anthony leaned slightly forward, asking slowly, "When you looked at me at the gate, what exactly did you see that made you think I didn't belong here?" No one breathed. Catherine opened her mouth, then closed it again. Safe answers raced through her mind. Protocol, random check, security. But his eyes cut through every excuse. I, she stammered. Behind her, Lauren's eyes filled with tears. Anthony's voice pressed on, not raised yet resonant. "I asked for one thing, the truth." Catherine's chest clenched. Then, as if breaking apart, she whispered, "I thought you looked out of place." A wave of shock rippled through the cabin. Someone gasped. Another murmured, "She admitted it." Phones buzzed. Live streams surged by tens of thousands of new viewers. Anthony nodded, lifted the glass, took a sip, then set it down again. "Out of place," he repeated slowly. Leaning back, his eyes never left Catherine. "You've worked for Orion how long?" 23 years, she replied, her voice strangled. "And in those 23 years, how many black passengers have you personally seen, escorted out of a seat they paid for?" Catherine froze. Her memory flooded. Faces with darker skin, confusion in their eyes, arguments silenced quickly, men quietly walking away under cold stares. She had never counted. She had never thought she needed to. I don't know. I haven't counted," she whispered. Anthony set the glass down, his voice firm. "Maybe you should start." The words struck like a verdict. No gavel, no judge. Through calm composure alone, he had turned Catherine into living proof of a bias that had festered for years. Lauren drew a sharp breath, whispering to herself, her eyes wet. "We failed the test." Catherine stepped back, pushing the cart slowly, her cheeks burning with shame. She felt every eye cling to her back. In 23 years, she had never felt so small. Anthony reopened his leather notebook, writing in crisp, precise letters. Bias confirmed. Escalation necessary. Outside, the sky stretched deep and blue, calm and serene. But inside, Flight 3472 had already become a battlefield of truth. In the cockpit, the glow of the control panel lit the lined face of Captain Daniel O'Connor. He sat motionless, headset still clamped over his ears. The woman's voice on the line was cold, flat, without a trace of emotion. Captain, this wasn't an accident. Flight 3472 was selected for an internal truth test. Daniel gripped the armrest tight. Truth test. All the blood in his body seemed to sink, his chest heavy. We've documented a 40% rise in profiling complaints over 2 years. Too many were dismissed. Patterns don't lie. We needed to see how deep it runs. Daniel buried his face in his hands. He realized that he, with all his experience, discipline, and faith in absolute safety, was just another link exposing the gap. He was no longer in control. He was being controlled. In the cabin, Anthony Graves closed his leather notebook and slid it into his briefcase. He knew that in Dallas, the crisis room lights were already blazing. The communications team was in chaos, and with every passing second, social media doubled its power. In row 6B, the woman who had received his earlier note opened a live stream, her voice shaky, but resolute. He gave me this. It says, "We're not done yet. Stay ready." Her words echoed through the microphone, carried out to hundreds of thousands of devices. Viewers were no longer just spectators. They had become allies. A young man with a shaved head in row 10 leaned toward his friend and whispered, "Man, this isn't just a flight anymore. This is a movement." In Dallas, on the 19th floor of Orion Airlines headquarters, Kendra Liu nearly shouted, "We're at 250,000 concurrent viewers, trending worldwide. Every outlet is calling. We need a statement now." A lawyer protested. "Acknowledge nothing. We'll expose ourselves legally." Kendra spun around. "Expose? Look around you. We're already naked. He's the chairman. He planned this. Our only option now is damage control." The room went silent. Everyone knew she was right. Back in the cabin, Catherine Moore leaned against the metal galley, her chest tight. Out of the corner of her eye, she caught a passenger's screen replaying the live stream. Her own rigid stance, her voice questioning Anthony, looping over and over with comments flooding in. That's the face of bias. She should be fired immediately. Unbelievable, after 23 years in the skies. Catherine bit her lip until it bled. She had once been proud to be the strict gatekeeper. Now she was the symbol of the opposite, the guardian of prejudice. Lauren placed a hand on her shoulder, whispering, "Jess, they're saying his name everywhere. Anthony Graves, chairman of the board. The world knows." Catherine closed her eyes. There was no escape. No protocol left to hide behind. Anthony unlocked his phone, typed a short message. 3 words, stage 2 live. 2. Was instantly, a well-known television journalist received an internal tip. Chairman Graves is on flight 3472. He's exposing racial bias in real time. The news spread like an electric shock. Within minutes, CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera all broke the story. Passengers in the cabin felt the shift. Phones buzzed non-stop, the Wi-Fi strained under the load. A young woman said loudly, "My cousin just texted. We're on every channel, every channel." Silence vanished. People talked, raged, even applauded Anthony. The scattered claps grew into rhythm, echoing through first class. Anthony did not smile, did not bow his head. He sat tall, his eyes deep, as if he had anticipated every second. He did not need to speak. The truth was speaking on its own. In the cockpit, Daniel opened his eyes and stared into the mirror. His face carried fear, not just for flight safety, but for something larger: honor, career, and the fate of an entire airline. He whispered to himself, This will destroy us." But in seat 2A, Anthony had already affirmed one thing. This was not destruction. This was the death of the old, to force the birth of something new. Outside, the sky was clear and blue, but inside Flight 3472, an earthquake was shaking an entire industry. The Phoenix sky opened like a giant silver mirror. Afternoon light shimmered on the airplane's wings, but inside the cabin, no one saw the brightness. Only silence remained, a silence heavier than the roar of the engines. Flight 3472 began its descent. The seatbelt sign came on. The junior attendant's voice cracked through the intercom, trembling as she tried to sound calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing shortly in Phoenix. Please fasten your seatbelts and prepare for arrival." But no one moved. Passengers sat rigid, eyes fixed on seat 2A, where Anthony Graves remained motionless, his leather notebook folded neatly on his lap. His finger tapped a slow rhythm on the armrest, as if counting down to an unavoidable moment. In the galley, Catherine Moore leaned against the metal cabinet. Her hands shook with every bump of turbulence. Cold sweat soaked her uniform. She knew the moment the plane touched down would be the moment she faced the judgment of the world. Lauren looked at Catherine, her eyes wet with tears, whispering, "Jess, what's going to happen to us?" Catherine gave no answer. She stared at the void ahead, as though hoping silence itself could swallow the question. The wheels struck the runway, jolting the cabin. But no one cried out. Normally, landing was the time for sighs of relief, for laughter, for phone calls to family. Not this time. Only a frozen stillness, the waiting of people who knew they had just been witnesses to something much larger than themselves. The cabin door opened. Arizona desert heat rushed in. Passengers still did not rise. All eyes turned to 2A. Anthony stood slowly. He straightened his jacket, picked up his leather briefcase. His gaze swept across the faces around him, not angry, not arrogant, but sharp, heavy. Captain Daniel O'Connor stepped from the cockpit, his face pale. He stopped before Anthony, his voice low. "There's a car waiting for you at gate A3, sir. And the crew, we've been ordered to stay for debriefing." Anthony nodded slightly. "Good." He turned to the passengers. Phones rose again. He did not look away. His voice rang steady, not loud, but each word cut the air. "Thank you for your patience today. Some of you may not understand what happened. Others may understand all too well. Either way, I encourage you to reflect, because change doesn't happen in silence, and this plane has been far too silent for far too long. A scattering of applause broke out at the back, then spreaded forward. Not wild cheering, but a heavy, weighted sound, the sound of people realizing they had witnessed a turning point. Anthony did not bow, did not smile. He turned and walked out of the cabin, steady and unflinching, the walk of a man who had turned a 2-hour flight into a global public trial. In the galley, Catherine collapsed into a jump seat, her hands clutching her head. Lauren sat beside her, quietly crying. Daniel returned to the cockpit without looking at anyone, his words short and final. "Get ready. This isn't over." Moments later, the entire crew was escorted to the staff waiting room, where the pale glow of fluorescent lights fell like the glare of an interrogation room. A group of officials in dark suits entered, tablets in hand, eyes cold. One of them spoke. "This is no longer an internal matter. The FAA and the EEOC have already requested full documentation of Flight 3472. Effective immediately, supervisory employees on this flight are suspended pending review." Catherine's legs nearly gave way. All those years of dedication, all the pride in upholding standards, had turned to ash in just a few hours. Outside, Anthony stepped into a waiting black car. Before the door closed, he glanced toward the terminal's glass wall, where dozens of television cameras stood ready. He knew this was only the beginning. The real conversation, one that would reach every corner of Orion Airlines, was about to start. Flight 3472 had landed, but the storm it unleashed had only just taken flight. The next day, the press room in Phoenix was packed with reporters. Camera flashes exploded. Microphones rose like a forest of steel. The air was heavy, every eye fixed on the wooden podium where the Orion Airlines logo gleamed. The back door opened. Anthony Graves stepped out, tall, briefcase in hand, his face calm. To his left sat the executives, still and tense. To his right, two faces stood out, Catherine Moore and Lauren Price. One looked hollow, eyes heavy from sleeplessness. The other, younger, her eyes still red, but with a firmer resolve than the day before. Murmurs surged like waves as Anthony approached the podium. He set his briefcase down, adjusted the microphone. His voice carried, low and steady. No need to raise it. "Let's talk about how bias hides in plain sight. Let's talk about who we trust to welcome us aboard. And let's talk about what happens when silence protects the wrong people." The room fell still. Fingers stilled on keyboards. Every microphone seemed to tilt toward him. Anthony paused, his gaze cutting across to Catherine. She bowed her head slightly, hands clenched tight. Lauren, sitting beside her, placed a hand on her knee as if to remind her. The time had come. Catherine rose and walked to the second microphone. Her voice trembled, but each word struck like a blade cutting into herself. "I humiliated a man who outranks me in every sense, and I did it because of a bias I didn't want to admit I had. But I see it now, and I won't look away again." Gasps rose in the hall. Cameras zoomed in on Catherine's face. Red eyes, trembling lips. Capturing the moment when a woman once known as the strict gatekeeper turned herself into living proof of a rotting system. Applause broke out, at first scattered, then swelling, not because Catherine was forgiven, but because the admission itself was necessary, painful, and real. Anthony gave a small nod. He did not clap, did not smile. He only returned to the microphone, closing with a call. This isn't about one flight or one crew. It's about an industry, a system, and a culture. Change doesn't happen in silence. And yesterday we all saw what silence can cost. His words struck like a bell. In the days that followed, the clip of Catherine's public apology reached over 27 million views. Reactions were split. Half called her brave for owning it, half shouted too little too late. But whether praise or condemnation, no one could deny it. The events of Flight 3472 had become a turning point. Anthony declined every offer of exclusive interviews, turned down even multi-million-dollar book deals. He left only one line. "I've said enough. Let others speak." And indeed, people began to speak. Passengers recounted what they witnessed in the cabin. Airline employees debated openly about bias and silent complicity. The media called it the storm from Missit 2A. Catherine became the face of error. But instead of vanishing, she joined a new training program, launched by Anthony himself, the Equal Culture Initiative. She moved from auditoriums to classrooms, telling the story of the worst day of her career, the day that made her the symbol of what she once denied. Lauren, with the sincerity and courage of youth, walked beside her. She did not claim innocence. She admitted she had stayed silent, and that her silence also caused harm. A year later, at Orion's global conference, Catherine unexpectedly stepped onto the stage. No script, no notes. Her voice was low, steady. "I don't expect applause. I expect memory, accountability, not just for what we did, but for what we allow. Every day we step on a plane, we make choices about who we see and who we don't. I stopped pretending I was above bias, and that's when I finally started to change." Applause thundered, not for full forgiveness, but for the truth. Anthony stood backstage, his eyes shining. He stepped closer to Catherine and said quietly, "We don't need perfect people. We need honest ones." The story of Flight 3472 did not end in collapse, but in a new beginning. A reminder that sometimes silence is more dangerous than shouting. And when truth is revealed, it can force an entire system to change. You, the listener, are a witness too. Not just to a flight, but to a message. Change begins only when we dare to face the truth.